Welcome back, Year 9 historians, to today's Explainer. Get ready, because we are looking at one of the most intense, literally thriller-like stories in American history. We're going to examine how the United States, in just 3 short decades, completely collapsed into violence. It's a crazy story about politicians desperately trying to hold a cracking nation together and the explosive consequences when those fragile deals finally shattered. Okay, let's just dive right in.
So, here's our roadmap for today. First, the breakdown of compromise. Then, the delicate seesaw rule. Third, the 1850 trade-off. And finally, the Kansas-Nebraska explosion. Now, this timeline you're looking at isn't just a boring sequence of dates. It's really a ticking time bomb. From 1820 all the way to 1856, every single time politicians tried to fix things, they actually just accelerated the inevitable disaster. We're going to trace that fuse from the very first spark all the way to the final explosion.
Section 1. The Breakdown of Compromise.
Think of it like this. Imagine you have a pipe in your house, right? And it's bursting with pressure. But instead of turning off the water, you just keep wrapping it in duct tape. That is exactly what American politicians were doing back then. Literally, no one was solving the actual underlying issue of slavery that was dividing the nation. They were just slapping on these temporary political band-aids to try and delay a massive violent fracture.
Section 2. The Delicate Seesaw Rule.
Okay, let's travel back to the status quo of 1820. You kind of have to think of the United States at this time as a perfectly balanced but incredibly fragile playground seesaw. To keep the whole country from tipping over, politicians came up with a pretty simple fix: the Missouri Compromise. They literally just drew an imaginary line straight across the map of the United States. That was their way to keep the peace.
And the rule was super clear. Any new states added above that line, they'd be free from slavery. Any new states added below the line, they could allow slavery. That single line on a map maintained a perfect balance on our seesaw, keeping the number of free and slave states exactly equal, which kept both sides momentarily satisfied. But, as you've probably guessed, those rules were definitely about to break.
Section 3. The 1850 Trade-off.
Fast forward nearly 30 years, and the pace of our thriller really speeds up. Late 1840s, a war with Mexico hands the U.S. vast new lands out west. Then, in 1849, California applies to join the Union as a free state. Here is the massive problem, though. California is huge. It sits directly across both the top and the bottom of that old 1820 compromise line. The sheer geography of it completely broke the old seesaw rules, triggering an absolute national emergency. To stop the country from literally splitting apart on the spot, politicians desperately scrambled to create the 1850 Compromise. It was a really tense trade-off. So the North got California admitted as a free state. In exchange, the South got the remaining new Western lands organized as territories. And absolutely crucially, a strict new fugitive slave law was passed.
Now, this fugitive slave law stated that any enslaved person who escaped to the North had to be captured and returned. And this absolutely infuriated Northerners. Why? Because for the very first time, everyday, regular citizens in the North were legally forced by their government to help slave catchers. It brought the brutal reality of slavery straight to their front doorsteps. The Band-Aid was technically holding, but the skin underneath was boiling.
Section 4. The Kansas-Nebraska Explosion.
We've reached the point of no return. The pressure is built up, the pipes are rattling, and they're about to burst entirely. So what do you think happens when you replace a clear, established map line with a popular vote? Well, a politician named Stephen Douglas decided to find out, and honestly, it was a remarkably dangerous new idea.
In 1854, any remaining peace was totally shattered by the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Douglas suggested that instead of using that old 1820 map line, settlers moving into Kansas and Nebraska should just vote, just choose for themselves whether to allow slavery or not. This sudden change in the rules completely wiped out the historic Missouri Compromise line. The South was absolutely thrilled about this chance to potentially expand slavery north, but man, it caused absolute outrage in the North.
I mean, the political fury over this new voting law was so intense that it literally birthed a brand new major political faction. Outraged anti-slavery leaders actually teamed up to form the Republican Party. Their sole unifying aim was just opposing the spread of slavery into these new territories. The country was polarizing way faster than ever before.
Let's just walk through how fast things fell apart here. Step 1, the voting law is passed for Kansas. Because everything suddenly comes down to a vote, Step 2 immediately happens. Extremists from both sides physically rush into the territory specifically to hijack the election.
which leads straight to step 3. The political band-aids finally rip off for good. Arguments turn into riots and then into full-blown guerrilla warfare, with rival governments literally attacking each other's towns. I mean, the tension was so incredibly high that politicians back in Washington literally started bringing weapons to Congress.
By 1856, the violence in the territory was so extreme and so visceral that it earned a really dark nickname, Bleeding Kansas. Kansas had essentially turned into a literal battleground. And this proved to the entire nation that the era of peaceful political compromise was officially dead. The actual, physical fighting had already begun.
Which brings us to our final cliffhanger. If the old seesaw rule of 1820 was broken, the tense trade-off of 1850 had infuriated everybody, and the voting rules of 1854 had literally sparked a mini civil war in Kansas, if peaceful compromise was completely dead by 1856, what on earth was left for the United States? Take a moment to really think about what must inevitably come next for this cracking nation. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep that question in the back of your mind as you continue your historical revision.